The world had barely begun to grasp the scale of the invasion when the Xalar ships appeared. The sky, once clear and filled with the comforting hum of Earth's atmosphere, now lay cloaked under the looming shadows of massive alien vessels. Their enormous craft, shaped like colossal black pyramids with swirling, iridescent patterns, hovered above every major city across the globe, casting an unnatural darkness over the land. Governments scrambled to respond. Military forces from all corners of the Earth gathered in desperate unity, preparing for a battle they knew they were ill-equipped to fight. Earth's weapons were primitive compared to the might of the Xalar. They had laser-guided missiles, electromagnetic guns, and even some experimental energy-based weapons. Yet all their innovations seemed like toys next to the overwhelming alien technology. The Xalar's ships radiated a near-blinding light, their weapons capable of turning entire cities to ash with a single pulse. At a United Nations emergency meeting, world leaders could barely conceal their terror. "We can't stop them," the American president muttered under his breath, glancing at the other heads of state. "We don't even understand their technology. They'll wipe us out like ants." His voice, barely above a whisper, was drowned out by the rising chorus of fearful murmurs. Above the city of New York, the Xalar leader, an alien known only as Jalkor, addressed the world via a broadcast, his voice deep and resonant, like a rumble of thunder. "People of Earth," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "we have come to claim what is rightfully ours. Your world will soon be a part of the Xalar Empire. You have two options: surrender or perish. The choice is yours." His image flickered across every screen, his alien features sharp and unsettling. Triangular head, luminescent eyes, and a mouth that seemed permanently set in a sneer. He paused, as if savoring the gravity of his words, then added, "We have observed your so-called weapons, and we find them amusing. You may fire them if you wish. They will not save you." The broadcast ended with a chuckle, a low, menacing sound that resonated across the globe. In the wake of the broadcast, humanity's military leaders quickly formed a plan. At the forefront was General Thomas Riggs, a grizzled veteran with more combat experience than anyone could count. "They may think we're weak, but they've underestimated one thing," Riggs said, looking out at a large map of Earth. "Human ingenuity. We might not have their weapons, but we can fight dirty. And we will." Across the world, the sounds of war began. Earth's air forces launched all available aircraft, jets, bombers, helicopters, aiming to strike first. On the ground, armies mobilized, tanks rolled out, and soldiers armed with rifles stood at the ready. But even as they began their assault, their missiles and gunfire barely scratched the alien ship's armor. The Xalar retaliated with devastating efficiency. A single pulse from one of their ships sent a shockwave across the Atlantic, flattening Washington, D.C. and sending massive clouds of debris into the sky. The force of the attack was so immense that the very ground shook. The world watched in horror as their most powerful cities fell within minutes. Then, a massive Xalar ship, stationed above Paris, fired its main weapon, a blinding beam of energy that tore through the Eiffel Tower like paper, incinerating everything in its path. The city, once a symbol of human achievement, was reduced to a smoldering ruin in mere seconds. Back in the United Nations chambers, the room was silent, save for the hum of distant radios. Then, one of the French representatives broke the silence. "We're not even fighting," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're dying." And they were. Humanity had only just begun to comprehend the nightmare they were facing. The alien invaders, convinced that their victory was inevitable, stood by, watching as the humans struggled to mount a defense. The Xalar believed they were beyond any threat from Earth. The weaponry they had seen on Earth was laughable in comparison to their own, their civilizations measured in millennia of technological evolution. As humanity fought on, the Xalar laughed, their mocking laughter echoing across the silent skies. "Foolish creatures, Jalcor muttered to himself, turning away from his command center's viewport. Let them waste their strength. It will make their extinction all the sweeter. The devastation caused by the Xalar's first strike was incomprehensible. Major cities were reduced to rubble, and entire governments crumbled under the weight of an alien invasion they had no hope of repelling. The global military forces, while bravely attempting to mount some form of resistance, were overwhelmed by the advanced weaponry that Xalar wielded. Earth's best defenses, from missiles to railguns, were nothing more than pebbles against the crushing force of the invaders' technology. In underground bunkers and military command centers scattered across the globe, humanity's leaders and scientists huddled in quiet desperation. There was no grand strategy, no coordinated global defense. Instead, it felt like a last-ditch, hopeless fight to preserve some semblance of civilization. Among these leaders was Dr. Evelyn Trent, a brilliant scientist who had spent her entire career working on cutting-edge military technology. She had, for years, warned of the dangers of underestimating the Xalar, but her warnings had been ignored. Now, Earth was paying the price. "We need a weapon that can hurt them," Dr. Trent said, her voice sharp as she paced back and forth in a cramped war room beneath a military base in the Rockies. "Our conventional arms are useless. Their technology is too advanced." But she paused, turning to face the group of military officers and engineers around the table. "We've been looking at this all wrong. If we can't match them in firepower, we need to think differently. We need to exploit their weaknesses." General Riggs, his face gaunt and bloodshot from days of sleeplessness, leaned forward. "You mean their overconfidence, their belief that they're invincible?" Dr. Trent nodded. "Exactly. Their technology is perfected, yes, but it's also highly intricate. They've designed everything to be flawless. But no system is infallible, especially not when it's so complex. If we can destabilize their tech even slightly, we might have a chance." It was a gamble, a long shot. The weapon they had in mind was based on experimental research, an untested, volatile prototype with unknown potential. It had never been meant for war, but desperation had driven them to this point. The weapon, codenamed the Bane, was a high-energy discharge system capable of creating unpredictable electrical pulses. But the results were untested. A misfire could obliterate an entire city, or worse, fail to work altogether. "Are you sure about this?" Riggs asked, his tone strained. "We don't have any other options," Dr. Trent replied, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling. "This is our only shot." With a reluctant nod from the general, a cover team was assembled to deploy the Bane. It would be launched from a hidden, underground facility, far from the aliens' radar. The plan was to target a small, vulnerable fleet of Xalar warships in orbit to test the weapon's efficacy. If it failed, Earth would likely be finished. If it succeeded, humanity might gain the upper hand. As the launch window approached, there was a strange electric tension in the air. Military personnel checked the equipment again and again, ensuring every system was functioning properly. On the command deck, Dr. Trent watched the countdown clock tick down, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment that would either secure humanity's survival or hasten its extinction. "Launch in 5, 4, 3. The countdown continued, but Dr. Trent barely heard it. All she could focus on was the faint hum of the machine, the weapon they had built from nothing. Could it work? Would it even fire properly? Or would it simply be another failure, one more scrap of technology crumpled beneath the weight of an overwhelming enemy? 2, 1. Launch. The ground shook as the Bane activated, sending a pulse of energy up into the heavens, streaking through the atmosphere. The weapon's destructive force shot upward like a lightning bolt, splitting the sky in half. For a moment, nothing happened. The pulse seemed to vanish into the void. Then, a massive explosion erupted in the heart of the Xalar fleet. The shockwave from the pulse sent ripples through space itself, a strange, undulating force that seemed to twist and distort the alien ship's technology. One of the Xalor warships shuddered violently, its hull creaking and groaning as it faltered in its orbit. Then it exploded, utterly, in a blinding flash. A second ship followed, then a third, and a fourth. Panic spread through the Xalor ranks. The weapon had worked, sort of. But the success came with an unexpected side effect. The Bane's discharge had not only crippled the alien ships, but also sent a strange ripple through their communication systems. The Xalor's fleet had been temporarily crippled, something humanity had never imagined possible. And for the first time since the invasion began, the humans had struck a blow. But the cost had been high. The misfire had been worse than anyone expected. While the weapon had worked, it had also sent unstable energy waves cascading into nearby Earth-based satellites, scrambling communications across the planet. In the moment of triumph, they had no idea if the victory would last. Was this the beginning of humanity's salvation, or simply the first spark of a much larger, more dangerous war? The aftermath of the Bane's misfire was chaos. Across the globe, systems were in disarray. Communications with military units were severely disrupted, satellites were offline, and every major city's defense grid flickered between operational and blackout. But amid the confusion, there was one thing everyone could agree on: the Xalor were retreating. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had inflicted real damage. The Xalor ships, once confident and unshakable, were now visibly disoriented. What had seemed like a victory for the invaders, Earth's swift submission, was now unraveling. Entire portions of the Xalor fleet had been knocked out of orbit, leaving their remaining forces scrambling to regroup. Some of their ships had been ripped apart by the energy pulse, while others struggled with malfunctioning weapons and broken communication systems. The Xalor were wounded, and the humans were beginning to understand why. Dr. Evelyn Trent stood in the command center, staring at the holographic display as a live feed showed the remaining Xalor ships retreating to a distant orbit. She hadn't expected this. No one had. The Bane was a prototype, a shot in the dark, but it had done something no human weapon had done before. It had caused a ripple in the Xalor's technological fabric. How did this happen? Riggs muttered, his voice hoarse, as he watched the fleeing alien ships. We weren't supposed to be able to touch them. How did we? Dr. Trent looked at him, eyes wide with realization. It's the energy pulse. The Xalor's systems are designed for precision. Everything is calibrated to perfection. But perfection can be a weakness. She paused, then continued. What we didn't understand was that the more perfect their tech is, the more fragile it becomes under stress. The Bane disrupted the very foundation of their systems. It wasn't the kind of attack they anticipated, and they couldn't adapt in time. The Xalor had prided themselves on their flawless machines, crafted through centuries of technological evolution. Everything about their ships, their weapons, their entire war strategy had been built around an unshakable reliance on precision and control. But this wasn't the first time such a flaw had been discovered. Humans, for all their supposed primitiveness, had one trait the Xalor had overlooked: unpredictability. It was the one thing that couldn't be modeled, calculated, or controlled. As the military engineers and scientists scrambled to analyze the results, more shocking data poured in. The weapon had not only disrupted the Xalor fleet, but it had also caused a cascading malfunction in their communication network. A ripple effect that seemed to confuse their fleet commanders, causing them to hesitate in their responses. The very thing the Xalor prided themselves on, flawless coordination, had faltered. Wait, one of the engineers called out, pointing at a nearby screen. We're getting an incoming signal from one of the downed ships. They're trying to send a distress signal, but it's corrupted. It's not a regular transmission. The distortion was unmistakable. The corrupted transmission contained a garbled message that could only be deciphered in fragments. Unsure. Systems. Erratic. Can't. Explain. Zalkor's voice, once filled with arrogant authority, now sounded like it was coming through a broken speaker. Earth's miscalculations. We must regather, restore. Ourselves. The message cut out. In that moment, Dr. Trent felt a sudden surge of hope mixed with disbelief. Humanity had done the impossible. They had forced the Xalor to stumble. This wasn't just a lucky shot, it was a breakthrough. The aliens hadn't expected anything like this. They had expected humans to bend, to crumble beneath the weight of their superior technology. Instead, Earth had struck a blow that disrupted the very thing that made the Xalor formidable. "We need to press this advantage," Riggs said, his voice hardening. "This isn't over. We can't let them recover." Dr. Trent nodded slowly, her mind racing. "We need to exploit their weakness before they regain their footing. Every second counts. We can't afford to wait for them to adapt." The plan was clear. Earth had to strike while the Xalor were vulnerable. But the question now was how. The Bane was a fluke, a miracle that had worked once. They didn't have time to build more of them. Instead, they would need to reconfigure existing human weapons to cause the same kind of unpredictable disruption. Their best hope was to use the Xalor's own over-reliance on precision against them. Earth's military forces, once scattered and defeated, were now rallying. The tide of battle was turning, but they still had one critical advantage: the element of surprise. Humanity was unpredictable. They could shift tactics, change their approach, adapt in ways the Xalor simply couldn't anticipate. And so, as Earth's forces mobilized for the next phase of the war, one thing became abundantly clear: the Xalor had underestimated humanity, and they would pay the price for that arrogance. The initial victory had sent shockwaves through Earth's military and scientific communities. For the first time since the Xalor's arrival, hope sparked in the hearts of humankind. But with hope came the crushing weight of reality. The Xalor were far from defeated, and the war was far from over. Humanity's next move was critical. General Riggs and Dr. Trent knew they couldn't afford to waste this fleeting opportunity. The Xalor were already regrouping, their fleet retreating to a safer orbit, and their engineers were no doubt working frantically to stabilize their systems. Earth's forces needed to act fast before the invaders could adapt. "We can't rely on the Bane again," Riggs said, his voice grim. "That was a one-off, a miracle. What we need is something more reliable." He leaned over a map of the globe, eyes scanning the marked targets. "We need to hit them where they're weakest, disrupt their systems, tear down their command structure, and destabilize their coordination further." Dr. Trent nodded, her fingers flying over a tablet. "I've been thinking the same thing. We need to reconfigure existing human technology to exploit their over-reliance on precision. I've already had our engineers working on modified EMP devices, localized bursts of energy that don't follow traditional energy waveforms, something more erratic, more damaging to their systems." They began a series of covert operations to deploy these modified weapons across key regions. Military units, now more coordinated than ever, worked together to distribute these devices, setting them up in strategic locations around the globe, including military bases and important energy hubs. The plan was to keep the Xalor on their toes, forcing them to confront the unknown, to deal with weapons they couldn't predict or counter. In the skies above, Earth's air forces launched a coordinated attack against the remnants of the Xalor fleet. It wasn't much, a small squadron of fighter jets, armed with the new EMP-based ordnance, but the element of surprise worked in their favor. As the jets soared into the upper atmosphere, they released a barrage of erratic energy bursts, striking the alien ships like bolts of lightning. The Xalor, still struggling to regain full control, were caught off guard once again. The impact was immediate. Xalor vessels that had once been untouchable now shuddered violently as their intricate technology faltered. Energy shields flickered out, weapon systems misfired, and entire ships began to lose altitude. The Earth's jets, swarming like wasps, targeted weak points, triggering chain reactions of exploding Xalor ships. A victory, however small, was still a victory. And this time, it felt different. It wasn't just luck, it was strategy. Humanity had learned something from the first attack. The Xalor were now on the defensive, forced to scramble to understand how their own systems were failing. Their once impervious technology was no longer their strongest asset. It was their biggest liability. On the ground, things were just as chaotic. Resistance cells, scattered across the globe, had grown more organized. The survivors of the initial attack, ordinary citizens who had once cowered in fear, now joined the fight. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and sabotage became the norm. Earth's soldiers worked alongside civilians who were eager to take back their cities, their homes, and their lives. In Paris, a group of engineers and soldiers infiltrated a Xalor command center that had been established in the heart of the city. The Xalor had set up a massive communication hub to coordinate their remaining forces. Earth's engineers, working with stolen alien tech, hacked into their systems, planting modified EMPs and rerouting the signals. It was an incredibly risky operation, one that could very easily backfire, but it had to be done. The success of these missions was proof that humanity was capable of overcoming even the most overwhelming odds. As the global resistance efforts mounted, humanity began to see cracks in the once unshakable foundation of the Xalor Empire. The invaders were no longer able to coordinate their movements with the same efficiency. Their systems were failing, their superior technology no longer a guarantee of victory. Their once stormtrooper-like precision was beginning to crumble. But even as Earth pushed forward with its counteroffensive, the Xalor were not without their own contingency plans. Aboard their remaining motherships, their highest-ranking commanders conferred in hushed tones, plotting their next move. They had not yet unleashed their ultimate weapon, a planet-destroying superlaser designed to wipe Earth from existence in one fell swoop. But they could not afford to use it prematurely. Xalcor, leader of the Xalor invasion, clenched his fists in frustration as he surveyed the damage. "We underestimated them," he growled, his voice filled with contempt. "We allowed ourselves to believe these creatures were weak. They fight with chaos and unpredictability, something we cannot comprehend, but we will not let them win." The next move would be theirs, and it would be decisive. Xalcor had already prepared a final strike. Earth might have gained small victories, but in the end, the Xalor would crush them all with their devastating weapon. But Earth was no longer the same. It was no longer a helpless species at the mercy of its invaders. The tables had turned, and the Xalor were no longer facing just a planet of weaklings. They were facing a united, unpredictable force. The war was no longer about survival. It was about proving that humanity could never be crushed. Despite the increasing setbacks, the Xalor were not a species accustomed to failure. Xalcor, furious and determined, understood the one thing humanity had begun to realize. Unpredictability was a powerful weapon. It was something that Xalor could never fully understand, but they would not allow it to turn the tide of the war. The time had come for them to unleash their ultimate weapon, the one they had held in reserve for this very moment. Deep within the bowels of the Xalor mothership, an enormous superweapon lay dormant. It was a massive array of energy conduits, resonators, and graviton stabilizers, a doomsday device designed to wipe entire planets from existence. A single shot, powered by the energy cores of a dozen captured stars, could obliterate Earth in the blink of an eye. The weapon was capable of focusing its destructive power through the atmosphere and down to the planet's core. One blast, and Earth would cease to be. Xalcor stood before the control console, his fingers trembling with anticipation. "Activate the Eclipse cannon," he ordered, his voice cold with certainty. "It's time to end this rebellion. Let humanity feel the true power of the Xalor." As the command was executed, the massive weapon began to hum with energy. The surface of the mothership rippled as an intense, bright light gathered in the cannon's focal point. The weapon was nearly ready, but Xalcor was not the only one who knew the stakes. Far below, on the surface of Earth, humanity's resistance was gearing up for what might be their final chance at survival. General Riggs had rallied all of Earth's forces, military, civilian, and the makeshift guerrilla groups, into a single unified front. They had one last opportunity to strike before the Accelor unleashed their devastating weapon. If they failed now, humanity would be extinguished without a chance to fight back. Riggs' mind was razor sharp, and he knew what had to be done. The human forces, spread thin across the globe, would need to make a decisive stand. "We've got to hit them where it hurts," Riggs said, eyes scanning the battlefield data. "We can't let them fire that weapon. If we let them finish charging, Earth is done." Dr. Trent, still reeling from the near-miraculous success of the EMP attacks, was working frantically in a lab to perfect a new kind of weapon. This one was based on what they had learned from the Accelor. Disruption. This time, it wasn't just an EMP, it was a high-frequency pulse generator, a weapon designed to overload the Eclipse cannon systems before it could fire. If they could get close enough, if they could get this device into the heart of the mothership's power core. "How long until it's fully charged?" Dr. Trent asked, her eyes darting over the screen, calculating. 5 minutes, one of the engineers replied. "Then we don't have much time," she muttered. The plan was risky, but it was humanity's last shot. A small team of elite soldiers, led by General Riggs himself, would infiltrate the mothership using a fleet of newly modified stealth craft, ships that could bypass Accelor sensors, thanks to human ingenuity and borrowed alien technology. They would have one chance to get close enough to plant the pulse generators before the cannon could fire. As the stealth ships made their way to the Accelor mothership, the tension was palpable. This was not a traditional battle. There would be no artillery, no dogfights in the skies. It was a surgical strike, a desperate mission to disrupt the heart of the Accelor war machine. Meanwhile, back on the ground, humanity's forces continued to hold their ground. Every resistance group, every nation, every defiant soul who had joined the fight knew that the fate of Earth rested on this mission. Their hearts beat as one, united not in fear, but in defiance. The Accelor had underestimated them. And now, humanity would prove that no empire, no matter how technologically advanced, could destroy them. The countdown to impact was ticking. Riggs' team neared the mothership, cloaked under the cover of Earth's newest stealth tech. As they neared the entrance to the ship, the enormity of their task weighed on them. They had one shot to stop the Accelor from unleashing the full force of their power. On board the mothership, the Eclipse cannon's core hummed louder. Jalcor stood, his gaze fixed on the console, feeling the immense power surging through the weapon. "Ready to fire," he murmured, barely able to contain his excitement. "Prepare for total annihilation of Earth." As he prepared to give the final order, the entire ship shuddered. The familiar hum of their technology flickered. Jalcor frowned. "What is this?" He slammed his fist on the console, sending sparks flying. "No, we cannot allow this malfunction." Before he could finish, the ship lurched violently. A massive pulse of energy erupted from within the mothership as General Riggs and his team successfully planted the device, triggering a cascade of unstable energy through the ship's core. The countdown clock for the Eclipse cannon stopped. The pulse of energy that coursed through the Accelor mothership was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. The ship's once flawless systems, their finely tuned machines, now groaned under the stress. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the eerie hum of their technology was replaced by the sharp hiss of failing circuits. Jalcor's once confident stance faltered as the ship trembled beneath his feet. His gaze darted frantically between the console and the malfunctioning screens. The Eclipse cannon had been disarmed, but not destroyed. "Impossible," he roared, slamming his fist into the control panel. "How did they?" The Accelor leader's voice cracked, fury mixing with disbelief. The power surge triggered by the Earth team had indeed disrupted the core, but it wasn't enough to destroy the weapon entirely. Instead, it had rendered it unstable, sending the entire ship into a tailspin. The Eclipse cannon would not fire, but if left unchecked, the instability within the ship's systems could create a catastrophic chain reaction. The Accelor mothership, along with their remaining forces, was now at risk of disintegrating from within. Meanwhile, Riggs and his team were fighting their way through the ship's maze-like corridors, desperately trying to disable the remaining defense systems and prevent the ship from tearing itself apart. Their mission was far from over. The countdown to detonation had begun, and the danger was now twofold: the unstable cannon and the alien forces trying to hunt them down. As they moved through the shadows, every step was fraught with tension. Riggs' team, 3 soldiers and Dr. Trent, who had insisted on accompanying them, made their way toward the heart of the ship's central control hub. Their objective was simple: overload the systems even further, forcing the core to collapse in on itself. They were racing against a clock they couldn't see but knew was ticking relentlessly. "Keep moving," Riggs said, his voice strained but determined as they sprinted through the winding corridors. "We don't have much time." Dr. Trent's mind raced as she tapped away on a portable device, analyzing the data from their earlier breach. The feedback loop she'd set in motion was growing stronger, but it still wasn't enough. "We need to trigger a complete system overload," she said, her voice cool despite the gravity of the situation. "If we can reach the engine room and breach the containment field, we can force a meltdown. That will destroy the ship and anything it carries with it." Their path was a dangerous one, and the Xalor were closing in fast. Their sleek insectoid war machines scuttled through the corridors, determined to reclaim their once unshakable position of dominance. Riggs and his team kept their heads down, moving swiftly through the ship's hull, dodging detection. Every sound, the crackle of their equipment, the pounding of footsteps, felt like an eternity. Time was their enemy, and though they had disrupted the Xalor's plans for the moment, the reality was sinking in. The ship's core was destabilizing rapidly. If they didn't succeed in triggering the final collapse, Earth's chances of survival would diminish drastically. Back on Earth, the resistance forces were watching the events unfold from the safety of their command centers. The tide of battle had shifted, but the war was far from over. Human forces, emboldened by the unexpected success, pushed forward in coordinated strikes against the remaining Xalor strongholds. For every alien vessel taken down, for every strategic base obliterated, humanity's resolve grew stronger. In the skies above, Earth's remaining fighter jets launched coordinated attacks, targeting what was left of the Xalor's fleet. The air was thick with tension as the remaining ships, now badly crippled and disorganized, attempted to flee. But Earth's forces weren't giving up. Every fighter that soared into the atmosphere was another symbol of humanity's unyielding will to survive. It was an all-out offensive, a message to the Xalor that they had underestimated Earth in every way. Back on the mothership, as Riggs' team neared the engine room, the final push was imminent. The overwhelming surge of power and erratic readings on Dr. Trent's device signaled that they were nearly out of time. If the core exploded, there would be no survivors, human or Xalor. "Almost there," Dr. Trent muttered, her fingers flying over the holographic screen in front of her. She wasn't just trying to overload the system. She was trying to channel the energy from the unstable cannon into the ship's engines. It was a long shot, a dangerous one. But if successful, it would force the Xalor ship to implode from within, taking everything with it. Just as they reached the door to the core chamber, an explosion rocked the ship. A violent blast sent the entire team stumbling, and Riggs barely managed to keep his footing. The lights flickered, and the corridors seemed to bend as the ship's remaining systems struggled to stay online. Riggs slammed his hand on the console beside the door, trying to access the ship's final security override. "We need to hurry," Riggs barked. Dr. Trent's mind raced as the countdown continued in the background. "If we don't get this right, we'll be vaporized with them." The door to the core room slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the massive reactor, glowing and pulsating with an alien energy. It was beautiful, yet terrifying. The heart of the Xalor's might, now on the verge of destruction. Riggs motioned for his team to move, and together they planted the final explosives to trigger the meltdown. Every second felt like an eternity, and as they ran back toward their escape route, the ship's alarms blared once more, signaling the inevitable. The countdown in Riggs' earpiece continued to tick away, a chilling reminder that time was slipping through their fingers like sand. Each second seemed to stretch into eternity, as the walls of the Sattler mothership trembled violently, the internal chaos growing more chaotic by the minute. The deep hum of the reactor pulsed like the heartbeat of a dying creature, and the shrill wail of alarms reverberated through the steel corridors, urging them forward. "We're running out of time," Dr. Trent shouted over the blaring sirens, sweat streaking down her forehead as she sprinted behind Riggs and the rest of the team. "The core is destabilizing faster than we predicted. We won't make it out if we don't move now." Riggs didn't need to be told twice. His mind was already racing through the escape routes. They had planted the last of the explosives in the ship's core, and now all they could do was get to the extraction point and pray that the ship's systems didn't collapse before they reached it. The walls around them vibrated with increasing intensity as the ship began to shake, small tremors reverberating through the hull. The Sailor had lost control. The entire ship was on the brink of total annihilation. Riggs' team had one shot at this. If they didn't make it to the escape pods in time, the ship would tear itself apart, and they would be vaporized in the ensuing explosion. "Where's the extraction point?" Riggs barked, glancing at Dr. Trent. She pulled up a map on her handheld device, her fingers shaking. "It's not far. Just a few more corridors." The team pushed forward, moving with a sense of urgency that was almost tangible. The ship seemed to be collapsing around them, and they could hear the sounds of alien soldiers rushing to intercept them. The Sailor were desperate now, scrambling to salvage their failing vessel, but they were too late. The rebellion strike was already set in motion. They would either escape and live to fight another day, or the ship would implode with them inside it. They turned a corner, and Riggs slammed into the emergency override panel, opening the door to a narrow escape tunnel. The thick metal hatch hissed open, revealing a small, claustrophobic passage. The team poured through, ducking low to avoid the flashing lights and sparks shooting from damaged consoles. They knew the escape pods were just ahead, but even so, their breaths were heavy with the weight of the moment. Come on," Riggs muttered, his eyes scanning the tunnel. Behind them, the sound of Sailor footsteps grew louder, the echo of alien voices filling the corridor. The ship wasn't just falling apart. It was fighting back against its inevitable destruction. Then, as if the universe had decided to toy with their fate, the tunnel lights flickered out. "Power loss," Dr. Trent said, panic rising in her voice. "We're running out of time. The entire system's failing." Riggs knew they couldn't wait. With or without the lights, they had to move fast. He grabbed Dr. Trent's arm, pulling her forward. "No time to think. Just follow me." They pushed forward in the darkness, the sound of their boots echoing in the narrow tunnel. Every step felt like a countdown to oblivion. Their only hope now was to get to the pods, board, and launch before the mothership's core went critical. Suddenly, the entire tunnel shook violently, and the team stumbled as a deafening explosion ripped through the ship. The floor beneath them buckled, throwing them off balance. Riggs barely managed to keep his footing as the walls cracked, and flames shot up from ruptured conduits. The ship was starting to tear itself apart. "Move," Riggs shouted, pulling Dr. Trent forward. The roar of the blast still ringing in their ears, they sprinted, the heat from the nearby explosions pressing against their backs like a living, breathing force. They reached the escape pod bay. A final, metallic door slid open before them, and there, seated in the dim emergency lighting, were the sleek, compact escape pods, each one capable of holding only a few people. They had made it, but there was no time to savor their success. "Get in," Riggs yelled, already pushing Dr. Trent toward the nearest pod. The sound of approaching alien soldiers, their screeches echoing down the hallway, pushed them into overdrive. They couldn't afford a single delay. The last of the team boarded the pods as explosions rained down on the ship. The sound of the countdown in Riggs' earpiece was almost drowned out by the roar of the ship's destruction, but there was no mistaking it. Time had run out. The pods launched with a jolt, racing away from the mothership just as the core finally gave way, unleashing a shockwave of energy that sent the entire ship spiraling toward oblivion. Behind them, the Sailor mothership erupted in a blinding flash of light, its superweapon failing in spectacular fashion. The ripple of destruction spread outward, a final testament to the failure of an empire that had once believed it was invincible. The shockwave rocked the escape pods, but they held steady, guided by Earth's last hope for survival. As the smoke and debris of the shattered mothership drifted into the void of space, General Riggs allowed himself a moment of relief. The war was far from over, but Earth had struck a decisive blow. They had taken down the Sailor's greatest weapon, crippled their fleet, and survived against all odds. It was a victory, yes, but one that had come at an unimaginable cost. Earth had survived. But for how long the escape pods rocketed through space, their escape from the destruction of the Sailor mothership barely a breath ahead of the planet-shattering explosion that followed. Inside, General Riggs, Dr. Trent, and the rest of the team were silent, their hearts still pounding from the close call. The ship's sensors indicated they had broken free of the blast radius, but none of them dared to relax. They all knew this wasn't over. The cold silence of space was their only companion as they hurtled away from the wreckage, the vastness of the universe surrounding them. Riggs stared out of the small viewport, his eyes narrowing as he watched the massive fireball that was once the Sailor mothership. It was a beautiful yet haunting sight, a reminder of how far humanity had come in its struggle for survival and how much they still had to face. "Is it over?" Dr. Trent asked, her voice soft, but edged with disbelief. She was still recovering from the overwhelming adrenaline that had coursed through her during the mission. She leaned back in her seat, her fingers absently tracing the worn surface of the pod's control panel. Riggs shook his head slowly. "Not yet. The Sailor are far from defeated. We've crippled their primary fleet, but they have many other ships, and their reach extends far beyond what we've seen. We've only delayed them, but we've bought ourselves time. Time to prepare for what's coming next." The rest of the team nodded in grim agreement. The victory they had achieved was immense, but it was not a final one. The Sailor were relentless, and their thirst for conquest had not been quenched by the loss of a single ship, no matter how significant that ship had been. Riggs knew they had to stay vigilant. Dr. Trent leaned forward, glancing at the monitor in front of her. "I've been running simulations," she said. "We've intercepted communications from the Sailor. They're in disarray, but they're not going to give up. Their forces are retreating, but they're regrouping. They'll strike again when they can." Riggs sighed heavily, his fingers resting on the edge of the pod's console. "We've got to be ready. The world has only just started to recover from the initial invasion, and now we're facing a new threat. We need to unite our forces, not just with the resistance groups, but with every nation that still stands." Dr. Trent's eyes met his. "You're talking about creating a coalition, a global alliance, one that can defend Earth from whatever comes next. But will the world be ready for that? After everything we've been through, do we have the strength to face down another invasion?" Riggs looked out the viewport again, his mind drifting over the devastation Earth had endured. Entire cities had been obliterated. Millions of lives had been lost. And yet, humanity had stood strong. "We don't have a choice. The Sailor will return, and when they do, we need to be stronger than ever. The time for division is over. It's time for the world to fight as one." The escape pods finally reached Earth's orbit, where they were intercepted by Earth's newly reformed defense fleet. A mix of military vessels, civilian ships retrofitted with weaponry, and international allies that had stood together in the face of the alien invasion were now patrolling Earth's skies. The sight of the fleet gave Riggs a sense of cautious optimism. Humanity had proven it could fight, could survive against overwhelming odds. The escape pods were docked with the command ship, and Riggs and the team were swiftly ushered into a debriefing room. The atmosphere was tense but filled with a sense of purpose. Earth had won a critical battle, but the war was far from over. "We've sent word to every nation on Earth," said Admiral Harper, a stalwart figure who had been a key player in organizing the global resistance. "They know what's coming. We've already begun the process of building a new coalition, a united front that can withstand anything the Accelor throw at us." Riggs nodded. "Good, but we have to move quickly. The Accelor won't wait for us to catch our breath. We need every piece of technology we've salvaged, every ship we can retrofit, and every fighter we can train. We need to be prepared for a long fight." Dr. Trent stepped forward, her eyes focused. "I've been working on a prototype based on the Accelor's own tech. It's not perfect, but if we can get it right, it might give us the edge we need in the next battle. We'll need resources, manpower, and most importantly, time. Time." Riggs had no illusions about how little of it they had. But there was one thing he had come to believe with every fiber of his being. Humanity was resilient. It had survived the worst of the invasion. It had adapted, fought, and won when no one believed it could. And as long as they kept fighting, they had a chance. "Then let's make sure we use every second wisely," Riggs said, his voice steady. "The Accelor may have underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again." As the debriefing continued, Earth's leaders began to form a new strategy. Humanity would stand united, not just to survive, but to ensure the future of their species. Riggs knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The dawn of a new era was rising, one in which Earth no longer just fought for survival, but for victory, against an enemy that had once thought it could crush them. And as the Accelor retreated to regroup, humanity's resolve hardened. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Earth had shown it would not be conquered. And now, humanity would prove that they were more than just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with.